At this time in the rebuild process, we're going to rewind just a little bit. Just before the gearbox was stripped, the front and rear differentials were also taken apart and inspected. So Ulrich and Paul will now present differential care and repair.
So Ulrich, your many years of experience building diffs and gearboxes, and I really value your insights. Now we've taken both diffs out. We do it on all the vehicles that we're building up for overland travel, and we do an inspection, which you're going to do today and go through and tell us what would you look for and what would you consider replacing if it's needed, because you can always rebuild a diff.
Yes.
And there's some improvements we can do, like a solid spacer. So we've got our rear diff here. Tell us what you'd look for and check.
Well, generally speaking, we'll look at the main things first. Your main two gears in a diff would be your ring gear and your pinion there.
Yeah.
We will check the back of each tooth. The drive side, we'll look for dull marks, dings, and especially pit marks. In this case, it's got a smooth finish right through on the drive side and the coast side. This ring gear looks very good.
Okay.
I wouldn't deem this necessary to replace. The next thing we will check, we'll strip it further at a later stage and inspect the planetary gears. But for the time being, I can just stick my fingers in there and rotate them. Also, I don't see any broken teeth or pitted teeth on these that are visible. And also the amount of lash between them is not bad at all. And then the last thing we can check in this state, of course, is just to feel for roughness on the bearings. This one, it's obviously not new. The bearings get preloaded at assembly, and you can see this does not have much preload left, just because of the age. But no roughness. And then we can check a little bit of backlash by holding the ring gear and just wiggling the pinion about. That is your backlash, which seems fairly normal between the ring and pinion on this one. Good practice to replace bearings, of course, considering not being a new vehicle. That's basically a very basic inspection of a diff once been removed from the vehicle.
Okay, and being the rear diffs, you have a different type of spacer. You get the collapsible and you get the solid spacer.
Yes.
And in the bush, if you have a leaking seal, which can happen on a diff breather that blocks or something like that, changing the seal is very difficult if someone doesn't know how to set up the collapsible spacer.
Yes.
So what's your advice in that scenario?
Yes, a collapsible spacer or a crush spacer can only be used once.
Yeah.
It's basically a piece of pipe which you crush until the bearings reach the landing surface at the correct load, and then you stop. So as you say, if you ever need to replace a pinion seal, the whole diff needs to be disassembled, a new collapsible spacer fitted, preloaded, and it's not really a roadside repair.
Yeah.
So we recommend replacing the collapsible spacer with a solid spacer conversion, which then simplifies things a lot. You simply loosen the nut, take the flange off, replace the seal, and tighten it again, and you're on your way.
So that's really worthwhile. And once we pull this out, we've inspected this, so there's no leaks, there's nothing wrong. We could make a decision, you know what, depending on how you're going to use the vehicle, how far you're going to drive, you might just put this back in and go, you know what, I've inspected everything. Your mileage is not too severe, you're using it for weekends. When you've got some money, you can rebuild it. But I'm going to tell you, this car's got almost 500,000 kilometers on it.
Looks very good for that.
So that's amazing, eh?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought you'd be surprised.
Yes.
So that's what we find, you can never tell when you take a vehicle. You'll know that when you've pulled some diffs out, 100, 150,000, they're really badly worn. And what's contributing to the bad wear and tear of a diff?
The main thing, your lubrication. Every 60,000 kilometers, I'd recommend changing the diff oil, generally servicing.
Yeah.
But of course, you and I have spoken about it in the past. If you're prone to water crossings on your weekend adventures, water tends to get into a diff, break down the oil, and then the metal fails.
Yeah.
So regular oil changes on a diff will make it last a long time. And of course, a diff does not like a shock load. if you suddenly release your clutch to get over an obstacle or something, you can actually break the teeth right off. But in terms of wear and tear, I'd say the only thing you can do to avoid accelerated wear and tear is regular oil changes, and of course a good quality oil.
Yes, exactly. Here we've got our front diff, and it's going to be interesting to compare it to the back. So what are you finding more problematic on front diffs or not?
Front diffs, well, depending, if it's a full-time 4x4, your front diff works just as much as your rear diff.
Exactly, yeah.
But in this case, I don't think it is. So this rests most of the time, except for when you're engaged in four-wheel drive. So it should have a lot less, wear on it. It's worked a lot less. But comparing it to that one, it's also in perfect condition. It doesn't even seem as if the oil has gone dirty yet.
No.
So, surface of the teeth are beautiful. This one I can't really check the parameter. There's not much space for my fingers. But you can just see the cleanliness of it, the shininess. There's no pit marks, no dings, dents, dull spots, nothing of the sort. It's in great condition.
Yeah, so typically if we'd inspected this, I found sometimes when you drain the oils on the diffs, you'll find where the CV grease has come through and then changes the coloration.
Yes.
And then you'll see that can damage the case hardening on the teeth.
Yes, when the grease and the oil mixes,
Mix.
it also breaks down the oil.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
there's not what they call extreme protection anymore, extreme pressure protection.
Sure. But that's a case of a maintenance. If people are traveling with their vehicles and every 5,000 kilometers you check your oils, you'll pick something like that up. That's important.
Depending on your use, if you just drive to work and back in the suburbs every day, you can extend those periods of inspection. But if you use your vehicle off-road, dusty conditions, water, extreme temperatures, do it more often.
Yes, exactly. So again, with these, if we were advising someone, would we do a whole lot of work on these? The only advantage is to pull them apart, is to put the collapsible spaces. You're going to check all the bearings. If they were in really good condition, you go, you know what, do we change them? When you've gone to that point of pulling it apart, you might as well change the bearings.
Depending on your intended use.
Exactly, I think that's the
Yes,
key point.
if you're going on a sub-Saharan trip of 10 or 20,000 kilometers and you really want to avoid any possibility of a breakdown, replace the wearable items.
Yeah.
If you are going to do 10,000 kilometers a year, don't.
Yes, and I think that's where we're trying to establish. When people spend money on these vehicles, this mechanical side can get very, very expensive.
Yes.
And by the time you're rebuilding your diffs, you're rebuilding your gearbox, the budgets run away, and then you're still trying to kit a vehicle out. And that's where you've got to make a call. Exactly in this scenario, if someone came to us and said, we're doing weekends, we're going to be doing 2-3 weeks to Botswana, these would be perfect to leave as they are. They're not leaking, there's nothing wrong with them. But if you wanted to upgrade to the solid spacers, and would you recommend the solid spacer for towing?
Yes,
Definitely.
It also makes an impact on what I spoke about earlier, the shock load. If you have heavy loads and through acceleration and deceleration, it sometimes compresses the collapsible space and your pinion becomes loose, causing damage to your ring gear and pinion.
Yes. And the same with the prop shafts. So on most vehicles, when we pull them out, prop shafts have got either tight universal joints or they're worn. And again, they're not balanced over a period of time. And I found that that's another precaution. Put a nice balanced prop shaft with good universal joints in, properly greased up. You're looking after these components, which are really expensive.
We don't see it often, but a poorly balanced prop shaft can cause damage to your pinion bearing.